Hello, welcome. My name is Wolfgang Ulaga. I'm a professor of marketing here at INSEAD, and I'm also co-leading the Marketing and Sales Excellence Initiative together with my dear colleague, Christoph Sen. Today, our webinar is part of the Tech Talk series by Digital at INSEAD and Lifelong Learning. And it's organized together with our MSCI initiative. I'm very grateful for the support of INSEAD's digital initiative, and especially a big thank you to Sandra and to Pascal. Without your help, this webinar could not have been made possible. We would like to also acknowledge the assistance of Accenture to help us in getting the Tech Talk series working. The Tech Talks are dedicated to discovering, exploring new technologies and how these technologies impact management and society and business in general. Segue into our topic for today. You know, the subscription economy has been described by many today as the next business tsunami. For many tech startups, actually subscriptions are the go-to-market model from day one. At the same time, major companies across industries, all the way from consumer products to luxury companies, but also B2B companies and professional services, they all move into subscription-based. When you look at this wave that we see here on our slide, it's interesting that in the 90s, it started with the media companies. Then in the 2000s, we moved to e-commerce and intermediation. In the 2010s, if you remember, we have all the wave of the sharing economy. You'll see this one logo by BlaBlaCar, for example, which, by the way, we know at INSEAD very well. It has been co-founded by INSEAD MBA alumni, and there's a very famous MBA case written by INSEAD on BlaBlaCar. And today it's actually interesting that this wave continues and moves also into some industries and areas where normally you wouldn't necessarily think about subscription business, and especially the B2B companies, even industrial corporations today think a lot about how to profit from subscription businesses. The little quote you see here on the side by Pascal Layan, who is from BNP Leasing Solutions, I think the quote sums it up very nicely, because he says, what happens in the consumer space actually makes its way into the B2B space, and businesses are more and more inclined to look into subscription-based business models, much more than years ago. And it's actually interesting here at INSEAD, we see a lot of companies today asking how to work and how to experiment with subscription businesses. Now let's move to the next slide forward. And we want to, before we jump into our webinar, we would like to quickly just take the temperature and learn a little bit about you and your background. So we have two questions. First question, please take a moment to share with us where you are actually joining us from today. Where are you located? From what location you are joining us? Let's give a moment here and see where our audience is calling in from. Now, let's look at the results. Interesting. Yes, so 2/3 of our attendees today, you are all based in Europe, but we also have a nice cross-section from Asia, then from North America as well, a little bit of Central and Southern America and Middle East as well, and even Australasia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Great, so quite diverse crowd. Now, we would like to ask you a second question, and the second question is closely linked to our topic today. The second question is kind of asking you, for those of you who are working in the company right now, we would like to ask you to think a moment of the maturity of your own company when it comes to subscriptions. Where is your company today? And when you think about it, here we give you a number of options. Which statement actually reflects best your own company's context today? Have a look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options here. Maybe you're not sure about subscriptions if they're important for you. Maybe your company is just thinking about getting started. Maybe you are already experimenting and gaining experiences, or you are in the ramp up, in the scale up mode, or basically subscriptions might already be a very substantial piece of what you do. So let's take a moment here. Give us your feedback on where is your own company in that subscription journey. Let's have a look at the results here as well. So that's interesting. We have actually quite a diverse response distribution here. 1/4, a little bit of you is actually, asking, is this something that we need to actually look into? 1/4 of you are trying to get started. There is a little bit of experience with experimenting and scaling up, and quite a portion, a 1/5 or so, has already quite a substantial business. So that's interesting. We have a very diverse set of audience here, and that's great for our discussion. Good. So let me, with that in mind, let's keep that in mind when we now introduce our panel. So let me move to the panel members that we have. And before we do that, just as a quick reminder, this topic, it is part of a broader research cooperation that we have. We started about a year ago together with Zuora to build a partnership, and I'm very proud that Zuora is supporting us in this journey, where together we produce knowledge and insights, thought leadership on how subscription business really works. So don't hesitate to look out for these white papers we have started to write together, the inside knowledge pieces. This material is freely available, so don't hesitate to actually, after our webinar, look into many of these sources. They are nice complements to our topic of the webinar today. Great. So why don't I introduce our panelists so that we know your background. So first, I'm very happy and grateful that Amy Connery has agreed to join us. Amy is the founder and chair of the Subscribed Institute, and she's also the global vice president of the Subscribed Strategy Group, a team of advisors that help companies to design and implement their go-to-market and subscription strategies. Prior to joining Zuora, Amy has been an industry analyst for almost 20 years with IDC, and launched also the practice on software as a service for the company. Amy has worked a lot of years with very different firms in technology, in manufacturing, and in telecom. And I'm sure, Amy, from having seen many of your presentations, we can have a lot of interesting conversations around the topics that you accompany companies with on subscriptions. Now, next, we also welcome Michael Monsard. Michael is Principal Director of Subscription Strategy at Zuora, and he has been with Zuora for a little bit more than 6 years now. In those 6 years, I was impressed that you worked with more than 250 companies across industries and across the globe on business model transformation and on implementing subscription strategies. And that really gives you also a front seat view on what really happens in subscriptions. Before joining Zuora, Mike was at Deloitte Consulting and SAP in various functions from marketing, sales, finance, and IT. Now, on a side remark, for those of you who work in startups or are interested in the startup world, you might be interested that Michael also serves as an advisor to startups and as an investor in startups, and he loves to work a lot with startup companies. Mike is also one of our key players in the partnership between INSEAD and Zuora. So again, we are really happy to have both of us with you. And last but not least, I'm extremely pleased as well to welcome Johan Tripp from Philips to our webinar today. Johan is driving the design and execution of growth strategies, especially by working on communities of customers, growing communities, building deeper relationships and ties with communities of customers. And Johan has more than 16 years of experience in a diverse set of industries, from energy to fintech and telecom, but also media, for example. And of course, now, today, Johan leads the subscription accelerator at Philips, which is in fact a wonderful illustration, as you will see, for what's going on in this space and how exciting this space really is today. All right, so with that background in mind, why don't we jump into our panel discussion? And for that panel discussion, you know, I would like to set the stage with a maybe obvious question, but I think many of us ask this question yourselves. What really is unique about subscriptions? You know, you might say, heck, this is just old wine in new bottles. What is really particular and unique? And so maybe I may turn to Amy first. Amy, would you mind sharing with us what is really unique about this space and why is it getting all the hoopla, the interest right now?
So thanks. It's a great question. And I think one of the reasons why subscriptions today are very different from subscriptions certainly 100 years ago, but even 20 years ago. It's a combination of factors, many of which have to do with devices that we carry around in our hands, digital transformation initiatives that almost every company and every industry has invested in the last 7 years. These all give us the opportunity to provide very, very personalized services that deliver ongoing value, that are location aware, and that enable us to pay for these digital services in very flexible ways. And so it's a combination of, I think, all of the innovation that we've seen in digital transformation and cloud, et cetera, as well as an increasing interest from consumers in experiences versus simply ownership. And so those trends coming together are really creating an opportunity for businesses to think of different ways of creating relationships with the people that use their products and services.
Very exciting, right? So it's the convergence between hardware and software. It's the convergence between digital and non-digital, between data and analytics and products. It all comes together, and that drives and fuels this type of evolution. Mike, maybe you want to jump in here as well and share your perspective on this from the European side, maybe.
Absolutely, and I would echo what Amy's saying, and I would add that back in the day, let's say when you think about subscription, there are really 3 scenarios you do, right? The first one is you may be doing a subscription to build a captive audience that you would monetize differently. Think of publishing; they would get readership to make money on advertising mostly. Or maybe you'd have a subscription because you had to access to something that was too expensive to access otherwise, like a network. Think of electricity or water. There would no other way around. So you would have subscription for utilities. And last, that would be, to be able to get something you wouldn't be able to buy for yourself as a company or as an individual. That'd be leasing, rental models, if you will. That's financial mechanisms. And I think the big difference with old style subscription, or subscription 1.0, if you like, is the fact that those subscriptions, they were recurring, of course, but they had no focus on customer experience. They were most of the time rigid in terms of customer relationship building, as Amy was saying. It was pretty much one size fits all and very much still transactional. And the service would not get better over time. And again, Amy hit the nail on the head with this. And when I think of you, Wolfgang, right, you don't get so excited, I'm sure, to get your energy bill versus when The Crown or Game of Thrones, there's a new season on Netflix or HBO. So I think that's the difference. And maybe one last point is the fact that companies understood this, and now they use subscription to do 3 things sometimes. either subscription is the product, think Netflix, you pay for the subscription. Subscription can enhance the product. Think of Caterpillar, when they create connectivity on top of their 1 million machines, and you have connected services to improve the way you use the machine. Or subscription can create an experience so you can sell more products. Think about Amazon Prime, for example, in which Amazon Prime is a reason for you to buy more Amazon products. So I think that those are some of the key differences on top of the enablers that Amy described. If that makes sense.
Wonderful. So we see it's kind of a new animal, subscriptions 2.0. Some new things are coming really on board, front and center. Value is created all the time. It's not just a handover. I have to be with customers 24 hours, 7. I can personalize it. Lots of opportunities here. Now, stay with us for a second, Mike. Just an additional question here. What kind of customer or consumer behavior trends are fueling all of this? So we understand it's a new animal, subscription 2.0, but from the consumer and the customer side, we see a lot of changes. Maybe Mike first for the B2B perspective, and then we'll turn over back again to Amy for the consumer user perspective. Mike first, and then back to Amy.
So I think that the trend, and Amy would emphasize it even more for consumers, but there's an overall preference. And we see this through all the poll we run, right? We've been running it for years, and it's increasing every year. And companies and individuals prefer using a service instead of having the burden of owning something. And that's in B2B, that's this big trend of CapEx to OpEx, associated with servitization. So you mix the two, and you add digital services on top, and pretty much you got subscription. Now, why do people want to, what's the problem with ownership? Is Amy mentioned it's continuous value. When you buy something, it doesn't get better most of the time. It doesn't provide unique and personalized experience. You can't tailor it. When you buy something, typically it stays the same. But when you subscribe, you can upsell, downsell, cross-sell, which is, well, when we discuss, we tend to call that, you can right sell. And there's, in general, this lack of freedom and flexibility. So especially in times of COVID, companies really value the ability to consume with flexibility. And if I just give 2 quick numbers before Amy moves into consumers, at a high level, subscription has been growing about 430%, 430, in the past 9 years. And during COVID, companies kept growing, and that's 80% of companies that kept growing during COVID. That's really resilient. And my last number would be the market sizing. Market size of subscription today is estimated at 650 billion. And that's a very recent study from UBS. And it will double by 2025. So to answer your question in simple words, Wolfgang, it's a customer imperative in B2B for sure. And it's driven by the fact that people do not want to own things. They want to get access to the outcome and subscribe to the outcome.
Yeah, actually in B2B makes a lot of sense, right? Moving from the product to the outcome, the performance. Subscriptions allow me to do this. And in the COVID environment, when visibility is low, it really helps us to gain flexibility. And it just resonates well with the B2B crowd. Now, Amy, I've seen so many of your presentations, and I've always been in awe about how you describe also the consumer side, right? The fascinating things happening in the consumer space and how this resonates so well with the subscription world. Would you mind sharing with us maybe 2 or 3 examples of what you see, how this whole move from ownership to usership works in the consumer space?
Absolutely. And I think if I could see all of you on the conference today, and I usually ask at the beginning of a presentation, think of your favorite subscription. And sometimes I'll ask people to name a few of them. And the universal reaction that I see when I've asked this question everywhere around the world is people have big smiles on their faces. And I've heard subscriptions like a subscription that comes and brings turf to your house for your dog to go to the bathroom on your balcony if you live in a high-rise apartment, and then comes and removes the turf every week. Subscriptions like the one that I used last summer with my family, where we subscribed to a boat. So for those of you that live near the water and have maybe experience with boats, owning a boat, there are a lot of challenges associated with that, not least of which it's prohibitively expensive. And I live in New England where there's winters and you have to winterize it. really all I want is the experience of boating. So being able to show up at a marina, have a boat, use the boat, bring the boat back, leave is perfect, because that outcome that I want to achieve is simply the wind in my hair, not ensuring, fixing, cleaning, storing, all of the things that come with ownership. I think another reason why consumers feel really good about subscriptions is there's a big sustainability angle associated with a lot of these product to services subscriptions. So for example, taking the boat that I just gave, rather than having one owner that buys this boat and uses it, you know, a very small fraction of the time that the boat could be used, suddenly you have very high utilization on something. Also, the manufacturers of the boat in that scenario have a very high incentive to make sure that that product is built to last, right? Because they're not simply selling that product to me and hoping, you know, giving the burden of making sure that the parts don't break and that the engine doesn't fail. They're putting that on the customer in the ownership model. With the subscription model, that burden stays on the manufacturer of the product or service. So there's a high incentive for them, rather than building these products for planned obsolescence or building parts that will break because they make money when the owner comes back in and has to buy the new parts. They themselves have a much higher economic incentive to make those products much more sustainable long-term. And there are also democratization of access that we see in areas such as textbooks and clean water, where subscriptions are able to provide an economic model that makes it feasible to provide these products and services or digital services to communities that wouldn't have otherwise had access to some of these really important and critical services.
So if I hear you well, some really fundamental trends that really fuel the subscription economy. On a side remark, you know, we also have a little dog at home, Chihuahua, and I was very interested in what you just said. So after this webinar, we have to connect over this. Our little Joshua would be interested, and me too. But you know, it's interesting. You said people have a smile on their face because they get a wow experience. We wrote a case here at INSEAD on Lemonade, the insurance tech disruptor, bringing insurance as a subscription and disrupting this rusty world of insurance. And no surprise, it's a subscription business model, among many other interesting aspects here. So I really see why you mentioned this wow effect, or this experience effect, which is really a big one. Now, talking about this, turning to Johan. Johan, Philips, do you see the same trends? Is this in line with your experiences when we look at Philips? What is your take on this?
Yeah, so definitely, and I think let's start with the smile, because that's where it starts and should end, of course. A subscription, and then maybe to make it very simple, is nothing more than a repeated interaction, and that repeated interaction gives you the insights you need to understand your consumer, their needs, and to be able to respond to it. If that is not there, if that basic framework is not there, you're not able to provide that smile, because you just don't know. So that is also what we see at Philips. So if we're able to change, to enter into a relationship that goes over time, we're able to better respond to the needs. And we're indeed then looking at just providing convenience, just making sure that the product is there in time. Or we're looking at lowering the price point, making sure that people are able to try something before they buy it. And even, and I think the last part is the most interesting one, looking at the outcomes. What do you need it for? What's the end goal you're looking for?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So look, why don't we go a little bit deeper there, Johan? Maybe what we could do is share one or two very practical examples so that we all get a very clear and crisp understanding. What are we actually talking about in the consumer space and also in the Philips world? So if you don't mind, why don't we look at 1-2 examples with your help to understand? I understand it started very small at Philips, if I'm right. You tiptoed, you experimented, but now it has the potential actually to really drive growth and become a substantial activity within Philips? Over to you, Johan.
Yeah, indeed. And the example you're looking at, I think, is describes very simple the lowering of the barrier, the price barrier, where there's a product which adds incremental, a beautiful value. It's been proven. However, the price point is still limiting the adoption. So if we then frame it in a subscription, we allow consumers to try it before they buy it, and that for a price point that is acceptable. With this simple change, we reduced, for example, the decision journey, which took 6 months on average, to 3 months. And during the journey, we see that the people who are actually in a try and buy subscription are much more engaged with the product, use it more often, but also much more engaged with Philips, responding to emails, opening emails, also at double the rate that we usually see. And indeed, this started small. This started with just one experiment, and this is now a basic that's being deployed.
Fascinating. So that's one first example, right? The Lumia. Let's have a look at another one. I think you have more examples here. Yeah, the Sonicare.
Yeah, I would say a straightforward example of convenience. Here, the price point is not an issue, but having the certainty that the brush head arrives every quarter, every X months, whenever you need it, that is just very simple, very straightforward what needs to be done.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that this helps you to improve the customer experience, the end-to-end customer relationship, right? And so I'm kind of curious, how does it also help you in growing your customer base? Any points you could share with us? You know, we always talk about the fact that this is all about customer equity management as well. It's about acquiring, it's about growing, it's about keeping customers. Where, when, and how do subscriptions really help you move the needle? Any thoughts, any ideas there?
Yeah, so I think the big take there is that as soon as you move into the consumer realm, you talk about solving pain points. You talk about solving the tension that a consumer experience towards the offer that you as a company give. So for the first example, Lumia, you see a product with a high price tag, high value. And the tension, of course, that we solve here is that we say, try it first before you buy it. With that, we open up a complete new market segment that we were previously not able to address. Increasing value, increasing addressable market. With the second example, there we also pinpoint towards the tension, which is, okay, I have a toothbrush, but if I don't change my brush heads, it doesn't help me. It doesn't give me the outcome I need. So just help me with a frequent reshipment, resupply of fresh brush heads. But again, the key is here solving the tension, solving that what is blocking the consumer from optimally using, and getting the outcomes they want from your products.
Actually, it's very interesting because the two examples show two very different goals or objectives to pursue. On the one hand, reaching out to new customers, maybe unserved customers that would not even have jumped ship, and then serving existing customers better, more efficient and effectively. So to me, these seem like very two complementary examples. Would you say so, Johan?
Definitely. The first one is really focused on opening up new markets, addressing new consumers. The second one already taps into what is there, the consumer base that's there, and builds on top. And it also allows you, of course, because once you are in the relationship that is recurring, we can very quickly see and understand the pain points that come after X number of months. For example, do you need a new handle? So now we don't talk about brush heads, but we talk about handle, either upgrading, downgrading, providing a different one, etc. And what I really liked also about the intro is that this model is not just circular, it's not just going around for the consumer, but also for the business. So what happens with the brush heads when they are disposed? What happens with the handle when they're no longer used? As a company offering subscriptions, you cannot not think about it. So you have to. And that's the beauty of it. You enter into a relationship and it forces you to be circular. And then
yeah, so you really say the key word here. It helps us go into the circular economy and really bring this to fruition, bring this to life. So many advantages we see of subscriptions here. Thank you for sharing that, Johan. Now, Amy, what we just heard, if you take a step back and look at this from a broader multi-company perspective, we just heard it from what Johan says, it's a game changer also for the relationships with customers we have. Does that resonate with what you see in other firms across industries as well? Over to you, Amy.
It absolutely does. And I think the key difference, going back to the very first question, what's different today with subscriptions? Really, rather than thinking about a subscription as simply a different financial model, think of it more as a way of building enduring relationships with customers. And I really liked what Johan said in his last comment, that the provider can't not think about what happens after the customer uses the product or service, and there's toothbrush heads to dispose of, right? There's circular economy elements from the end customer perspective. There's this notion of needing and wanting ongoing value. And there's also a curation element as well. And so a really easy example, Michael brought up Netflix earlier, right? One of the benefits of some of the streaming services is because they understand what the consumer has viewed, they're able to make recommendations and help you discover other content that you might enjoy that you might not have heard of, right? So there's a communication, and there's a real important contract that the vendor has with you, not a formal contract, but an implied contract, that their role is to make sure that you see value on an ongoing basis. And in many cases, they have to suggest that to you. How can you create value with a catalog of so much entertainment that you could view? Or think of it in the software world, or think of it in the transportation world. So there's a question in the chat that I saw that I think is related here, and it had to do with rental. Why wouldn't a rental model work in this scenario? And I think maybe let's take transportation as an example, right? Certainly, if you want a car, you have different options for getting a car. You could typically buy a car, or finance it, or pay cash. You could lease the car. You might be able to rent the car. And if your objective is to have a car, those models work really well. But if your objective is transportation, right? Let's think about it more broadly. If your objective is transportation, you have those models, but you also have public transport available to you. You might ride a bicycle. You might take ride sharing, right? So ride sharing is a good example of a pay-as-you-go consumption model, which we consider a subscription model at the Subscribed Institute, because I have an ongoing relationship with the rideshare company, even if I'm not riding every day. I know that when I want to use the ride sharing company, I can. And that gives me an outcome that I'm looking for. I'm trying to get from point A to point B. And so companies that offer modes of transportation are thinking more broadly about that outcome, and thinking not only do we need to, as an automotive OEM, manufacture automobiles, but we also have to think about what is our role in providing services around that experience of ownership, connected car. And it's also our opportunity to think about playing in that broader transportation market that might include ride sharing, it might include cycling, it might include modes of public transport. And that gives you, as a provider, the opportunity to look at the broad market opportunity associated with all of the ways that your customers, who are very diverse and want personalized experiences, are looking to get from point A to point B, as an example. And that that scenario translates not just, in transportation, but in healthcare, in education, in medical technology, in financial services, as an example. You brought up Lemonade as an example as well. And that's another industry that's thinking very broadly about outcomes. And frankly, all of those industries that I mentioned are facing competition, right? From new digital entrants that are providing are opening the consumer's eyes to new ways of thinking about interacting with financial institutions, as an example. So it's really game changing across industries, and lots of opportunity, but lots of transformation required as well.
Now that's interesting, because actually what it really then means is just proposing value propositions is not enough. You mentioned the key word outcomes. That's what customers are looking for. So interesting, with subscription business, it's a game changer that we are now on the hook. We have to create value 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that's why it's just not a leasing, right? Now your interests are aligned, and you have to show and prove to the customer that you create value every single day. You mentioned Netflix. I found it interesting that Netflix actually now has a move to the idea that if people don't use Netflix for a while, longer than a certain amount of time, Netflix unsubscribes. People don't even take the money anymore by saying, look, apparently you're not using at all, and we don't want to take your money if you're not using Netflix or not using it in the best possible way. Really interesting how this changes the behavior even of the vendors, of the providers. Mike, over to you. What are your thoughts on this topic from a broader company perspective?
So I'll be very brief, but I would say that everything you mentioned is absolutely perfect. And I'm just going to put my shoes in the perspective of a company that would like to do subscriptions now. And with everything we've said, I think it's getting clear in people that may not have been exposed so much to subscription, that subscription seems, right, to have superior revenue and cash flow economics in general. There's a de facto retention behavior we've heard from Amy, from Johan. There's, you get more data because, customer wants to build a relationship with you. So instead of you trying to get data from them, they're actually happy to share. So you're starting to be in a very two-way relationship. But that comes at a cost, because, that also means that every single fiscal quarter, you don't start at zero. You start at, what you have as people who have subscribed to you. And what we know, just giving you data, is 70% of your customers, 70% of your revenue, will come from your existing subscribers tomorrow if you launch a business. So a lot of your revenue will come from your existing pool of customers. So what does it mean? That means that you need to be obsessed about the subscribers. And why I'm mentioning that is because a lot of people may have been exposed to companies that were extremely good to acquiring subscription. Think of the meal kits, the Blue Aprons of the world. And these companies, for a very long time, they were really great at burning cash to acquire people. But after, let's say, 2-3 months, they would lose those customers, meaning that with the revenue they would generate in that period, in some case, they may barely or not cover the cost of acquisition of these customers. So the message I want to emphasize on how it changes the customer relationship is the importance to have processes, especially in B2C, systems to automate this value communication, which is what you mentioned, Wolfgang. And Amy said, those recommendations, Netflix, 80% of the content that's being watched has been recommended by Netflix, for example. New York Times, I think they have a team of 10 FTEs focused on the first 90 days to make sure that your onboarding is seamless, right? And in B2B, as you may know, there's this growing function, and I think, Wolfgang, you've written on it, which is called customer success management. So in the late 90s, software as a service companies have started to build a function fully dedicated to making sure that the customer gets the value of the systems so that they're being right sold. And my last word would be, I agree with you, Wolfgang, in the fact that Netflix, proactively stops if you don't use the service. But that also means that in your mindset, when you move to subscription, you may need to accept to actually sometimes downsell in order to keep the customer. Because my last word is, what you care about is maximizing the lifetime value. And regardless on how to do it, it's not the discrete transactions, it's the lifetime value. Does it make sense?
Absolutely. And customer success management, it's a really interesting new function in the marketing and sales area. We talk a lot about proliferation of functions, but here's a new function that comes right up the alley. Customer success manager, customer success management as a key ingredient to making these recurring revenue models really work. And indeed, at INSEAD, we have published quite a lot, and also INSEAD knowledge pieces now on customer success and customer success management. So don't hesitate to look out for that. Now, look, let's put ourselves in the shoes of an executive, of an attendee to our webinar. You got me excited, you got my attention. I'm looking now, right? But how do I actually get started? How do I get this thing going? How do I scale up? How do I make this a success? Let me turn back over to Johan. Johan, you are sitting at the front seat here in the driver's seat of accelerating subscriptions at Philips. What are some of your insights, your lessons learned about how do you get this thing going? How do you gear it up and get traction? And how do you make it a success? What would be maybe the top 2 learnings or insights you would want to share with our audience today?
Yeah, this is of course the key question. And the key question is also, how do you get the insights? So starting subscriptions means that you get into that relationship and that you're able to get insights. So it just starts with getting started. If you want to take it, if you want to keep it simple, start from your product, just the core product you offer, and put it in a periodic offering, in a time-based subscription. And then you can grow. You can grow towards usage-based, the next frontier. In the end, of course, where you want to go is to understand what's the outcome that the consumer is looking for. Exactly what Amy is saying. But you need to take the steps before you get there. Coming up with a fully outcome-driven, beautiful offering will set you back a few years. But taking the steps to understand the pain points and slowly building your model towards that broader view on the product and specifically on the outcome that the consumer is trying to get, that is key. So get into the relation, get into the repeat mode, and get the insights you need to create value, reduce your costs, and get it done.
Yeah. So it all starts with customer insights and customer intimacy, and then taking those baby steps. Now I'm curious, Mike, you see so many companies and you work with these companies at Zuora on, helping them get this on track and accelerate as well. I guess there are a lot of organizational issues. How do I organize for subscriptions? How do I industrialize this? How do I build the sandbox where I can experiment on the side? Let's turn over to Mike first and then to Amy also as well to hear from both of you across industries. Again, what does it mean for gearing up for success? Your thoughts, your suggestions here. Mike first, maybe.
So I think what Johan mentioned is exactly the right thing to do. And I'm going to be even more blunt, which is, I think we start to all understand that moving to subscription involves some sort of a 360 or 180, whatever, change in functions, from pricing, marketing, digital, new functions like customer success management. And, either you freeze, you flee, or you fight, right? And if you want to fight, I think what we've seen as extremely effective is to start. And starting is hard, but the best way to start is to do it outside of business as usual, meaning that the first step typically that works is you take a team, a cross-functional team with people from your company, from people from the outside. So you have, let's say, new skills and existing skills, right? And even though you can be frugal, you need to have dedicated KPIs, because if you put the weight of your traditional business as usual, you're going to kill the nip in the bud, pretty much. So first off, you launch, and the focus is on the customers. And it's not about scaling. It's not about making margins. You just want to prove the model. Then you move into a second stage where you would start optimizing the model, create more tiers, more plans, and so on. You get maybe a bit more automation, more channels, more product lines, and so on. But still, typically, this is outside of the core. Then you move to a third stage, which is often seen as a first level of scale, where you start thinking about reintegrating this business and maybe starting to automate processes because you nailed the unique economics. And now you want to start maybe making margins. And then on the very last stage, which is leading, and there's a handful of companies in that stage, companies like I don't know, Zoom, companies like New York Times, Financial Times, and so on. This is really where you start having data, a real ecosystem, all the platforms and so on. And you're really leading, and subscription is, let's say, your main revenue stream. So there's really 4 stages, and it takes time, right? It may take 5 to 8 years, but you have to go step by step. So to summarize, start small, try a lot, get a license to fail, get executive buying and involvement, get a budget, just do it, and don't make assumptions, just get the insight from the customer, iterate, and then it will grow, instead of trying to plan, the perfect plan. And that's, just to conclude, one of the biggest challenge for large organizations, which is, we tend to make sure that we have the perfect plan, not to fail. And that actually prevents you to get a lot of customer insights. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's exactly how Philippe started. And now they're moving into this scale and lead phase at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So lots of new ways of actually getting this done, right? Lots of agile processes and structures. Amy, you see that as well over in North America quite a bit. Would you concur? Additional thoughts on what we just heard from Mike?
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And one comment I would make, given how diverse this audience is, and that there are quite a few people that may not even know what their subscription offering could look like, is just starting further upstream. A mistake that I've seen many companies make when they're looking to build subscriptions is they focus on what they have. So they look at their product, the features and functions, and they think of this as a classic engineering problem or opportunity. What can we build? And rather, the orientation should be thinking about your customer and what do they need, or your market, or what do they need? What is the problem that they are trying to solve, or what is the outcome? I know we've mentioned it so many times, but I find that most of us, right, grew up in the product economy. And so our orientation is always going to be start with the product and what we can do, and then figure out who needs it. With subscriptions, you really need to shift it. What's the need? And then think about, obviously you have to be realistic about what it is your company does and what you build and how you might meet that need. But it allows you to think, first of all, much more broadly about how you might be able to deliver that need, but also puts you in a much better position to actually create something that is going to be successful, because there's a real opportunity to help people on the other end. And I think another question that was asked in the chat that's related to this as well, what if you sell to suppliers, or what if you have a channel? What role does the channel play with a subscription service? And, this is related in that thinking through not only what does the customer need, but what is the ecosystem around that need. So I think there are opportunities not only to provide, look for new partners to go to market with, or new alliances to build within the ecosystem that can help provide that need, whether it's transportation or education or clean water, whatever that might be. But also there's a real opportunity for partners as well to think about, or suppliers or distributors, what's the shift in business model? Because chances are business as usual is not working that well for them right now. Yeah. And so they are also looking for new ways of innovating within their business models.
Wow, Amy, Mike, Johan, I want to use your comments in my marketing class, right? Because basically what you're saying, don't take this from an inside out perspective, build it and they will come. Really squarely focus on where is the customer care about first, where is the customer's value opportunity, and then let's leverage subscription to get the job done. It's kind of a reminder that, especially in the tech world, we sometimes seem to forget this. Some of these foundational aspects hold true, that start with the customer first, obsession with customer, as we know from Amazon and others, and then build everything backwards. Very interesting for that perspective here. Thank you for sharing those. Now, I see the time is quite advanced, and we want to give a few minutes for Q&A. We already answered a few questions, and thanks to our panelists of already jumping on a few questions. I see a question here which I found interesting. is freemium model still relevant? Is this the end of freemium models? I know, Mike, you've done a lot on freemiums and thinking about freemiums. Maybe we can just take 2 or 3 questions. Why don't we jump on this one, and together collectively we then look at some of the other questions. Let's jump on the freemium first.
So to your point, and I'll try to answer as briefly as possible. It's a big topic, right? Because freemium is an acquisition strategy, right? And too often people think freemium is a pricing model, which is a big mistake. So does it work? I think it does work. The problem is, I think freemium has been over promoted in case in which it doesn't work. So where does freemium work? When you have a huge market, meaning because the conversion rates are very, very limited, sometimes less than 2 or 1%, depending on the type of solution. And second is when you can create value from the network or from the data you're building through freemium. That's, let's say, you have to one or the 2 reasons to be able to move forward. In all other cases, I would fully agree with the comment or the question, which is I'd rather go for a free trial, and depending on the complexity of what you're doing, probably adding some hand-holding in the free trial. So maybe not too much of a free trial, but a free trial and enough budget to actually do the hand-holding to make sure that people who are doing the free trial actually understand the value of the solution. Because too often, to your point, you think you're doing a free trial and people will understand. And think of it, right? When you don't use Netflix, they proactively send you pop-ups, right? They send you emails. Maybe at Philips, they would give you a phone call to make sure that you understand the value of Lumea, right? So having, let's say, those capabilities make sense. So most of the time, you should think of free trial versus freemium, and freemium should be an exception, which is well documented, and it has to be a good reason.
Great, thank you. And I saw this one question to Johan. I'm curious about Johan, what you think about that question. The question was about how have you put this into place? Have you worked with Zuora as an outside provider? Have you all done internally? Actually, it's an interesting question. How should the company go about this? Do we have to do this with an outside company? Do we need outside help? Is it complex? Should it be done internally? Johan, what is your experience there? How did you actually go about this?
Yeah, and that's of course looking back. So I can look back on how we did it, but we did it 5-6 years ago. That's when we started actually. So if I need to answer the question right now, I would say there are a ton of options to use to quickly validate a subscription offering. So leverage those options. And then to Zuora, what we indeed did was reach out to Zuora directly and ask them, as Amy and Mike are doing, to really think through the model that we wanted to set up. Maybe one other note, we also decided to not interfere with the existing IT landscape. We built something completely outside of the system, and we're only integrating it as we speak. We started last year, and we're about to push the button to have it fully integrated. So one, make sure you leverage what's there, because they're very easy to use tools. To indeed, let's have a very clear look at what you're trying to build by designing it upfront, and then make sure you're able to, in the end, hand it over to your IT landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Johan, for sharing. Maybe last one, over to Michael. Several questions are asking for professional services, B2B services, taxes, consulting. Here in France, we have startups now in the tax world, accounting as a subscription. But what are your thoughts? Does this apply across the board, and especially in the professional and B2B service world?
So absolutely, and I'm sure Amy would add a lot of example, but I have a timely example actually, because I received a notification from, I think it's Melanie from Court. And actually Court is a very interesting use case because they provide furniture as a service, right? So imagine, how do you manage to turn furnitures when you have a need for flexible offices, which, as you can imagine, must be rising at the moment, and you need to change the furnitures and adapt it, and of course the office downsize and upside, right? So does it apply to every industry? It does, and actually you can become a professional service type of company by moving subscription, by moving as a service. Now, the last point I want to make is, funnily enough, I think one of the big 4 consulting companies, they did a survey about which industry is the most likely to be disrupted. And funny enough, they found that consulting is one being the most big candidate for that. And that's why they started doing, exactly to your point, accounting as a service. So instead of selling mandates for you to close your books, they would actually provide you, let's say, a subscription price and different tiers. And some tiers would include advisory, benchmarking, ability to talk to an expert. So there's definitely a lot of things to do. Is it the most mature industry? No, but it's getting there, absolutely.
Got it. Look, I know the timing is up and I don't want to go overboard. May I ask Sandra to help us go back to our last slide, last 2-3 slides you want to share with everybody else before we wrap up. Look, first of all, thank you so much for attending. We want to invite you to stay connected. Lots of things happen at INSEAD and with the partnership with Zuora on subscription economy. So stay tuned. Check out our website at MSCI. We work on many of these topics at INSEAD and with the Marketing and Sales Excellence Initiative. Let me move forward to the next one. Next slide here, with the help of Sandra. MSCI does a lot of work with companies, with our students and with firms in research, creating knowledge generation like we do with the subscription world. In education, we have a subscription boot camp, or in practice, working on subscription projects. And if you move to the next slide again, we have quite an interesting set of member firms already. So these are companies supporting MSCI. And these are all companies also, interestingly, also looking into the subscription world. Now, with that, last but not least, let me express our gratitude to the panelists for sharing your thoughts and ideas today in this hour about what you have learned of subscriptions. Thank you very much for being with us. Again, a big thank you as well to our tech team, to Digital at INSEAD, Pascal, Sandra, the entire team. The support of you is really deeply valued. And also, of course, last but not least, a big thank you to as well you, the audience, who took your time for an hour to join us, dial in, and actually be with us, ask many questions. It's great to see you also engaged and be with us for this hour. So with that, let's wrap up at this point in time. Again, vielen Dank, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much to all of you, and please stay tuned for the next webinars. There is many more to come in our tech series, but also for our subscription activities here at INSEAD. Have a good day, good remainder of the day, wherever you are.